I'd like to welcome everyone to the West Virginia Archives and History Thursday evening lecture series. Some of our upcoming lectures are Hillside Fields, A History of Sports in West Virginia featuring Dr. Bob Barnett. That's going to be on September 10th at 6 o'clock, right here in the Archives Library. Family History, The Sons of the American Revolution and Reenacting by Steve Hart. That's on September 12th at 6 o'clock right here in the library. And then at the end of September, on September 26th, Joetta Kuhn and Patsy Atkins of the Ann Bailey chapter of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution will conduct a genealogy and the Revolutionary War workshop right here in the Archives Library. That will begin at 6 o'clock, just as our other lectures are. Please refer to our website for upcoming lectures and information that we post there. And if we don't have your email to where we can send you some of these news blasts and things like that, if you'll make sure that one of us get your email, we can go ahead and get that information to you whenever it becomes available. We are planning our 2014 lectures schedule, so if you have any suggestions as far as topics and things, please let us know. We'll try to take that into consideration when we do our scheduling. And we are planning for the first Tuesday of each month and the third Thursday for lectures. This evening, Dean Six will be the master of ceremonies for our lecture. So please welcome our 6 storytellers.
This year marks the 200th anniversary of the first glass production in West Virginia. While the state is celebrating 150 years, we got all excited, being glass historians and lovers of glass history, that we should somehow embark on a project to celebrate that landmark across the state of West Virginia. This evening is one of those programs. We're pleased to be here. Last year, I spoke here on West Virginia glass. I came an hour late, misunderstanding the time. This year we were all early. Having spoken a year ago, I didn't think you probably weren't particularly interested in hearing me solo again. Our program tonight is entirely free-form. We're going to see what happens. We've asked 6 different people from 6 parts of the state to give you a brief discussion about the role glass has played in their lives. So we each have a different perspective. We haven't compared notes much. 2 of us have done a little side practice. But we each bring an entirely different perspective in who we are and how our interaction with glass was, and geographically where we are in the state. So the idea is 6 voices addressing the topic of 200 years of West Virginia glass. And the first will be our friend Millie.
I grew up in Williamstown, West Virginia, which is the home of Fetnar Glass. I'm really proud to have been brought up in a glass town. Not everybody can say that. Our neighbors around us in my neighborhood, a lot of them were glass workers. I lived a block and a half from the factory on the same side of the street. Ike Willard and his wife and 2 girls came to Williamstown in 1950 as a chemist for Fenton. He lived cat-a-corner to the left across the street, and he passed away in 1973 at the age of 48 years old. I'm still friends with his 2 daughters. Mr. Hummel lived next door. He was a crotchety old guy. A large garden where he grew corn and tomatoes and all the things you put in a garden. And he didn't like us neighborhood kids too much around that garden. He would sit out in a chair and watch us to make sure that we didn't get in his garden and ruin anything. He was the corresponding secretary for the the local union of American flint glass workers. Fenton's union number was 21, I think. Catty-cornered to the right, and their backyard faced our front yard, was John Easton. And he came to the Fenton Art Glass Company in 1907 from Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. He was a member of the union from the outset and was the local union president for many, many years. He was a squirrel hunter and had dogs. I remember the dogs. And he passed away in 1961. Tommy Armstrong lived 3 blocks back of us and over on Poplar Avenue. His wife, Mrs. Armstrong, was our childhood babysitter. After retirement as a glassblower from the factory, Tommy became a tour guide. And he would give visitors an insider's view of just what Fenton did. And he did this with a well-earned pride. He was a sweet gentleman, as I remember. Willa Norman lived about 4 blocks the other way, and she worked for the Fenton Art Glass Company for 32 years as a bookkeeper. She walked by my house every day and watched me grow up. And as I got older in adulthood and moved back to the area, she and I became fast friends. Willa was so proud. She was one of the 2 people that created the numbering system that they used for wares in the factory. She was 89 when she passed away in 2012. The original gift shop for Fenton, as I recall, was down next to the guard shack, and it was pretty much just a little room with a dirt floor and some wooden shelves. And if Mom needed something, like a broken salt shaker, she would send us down there with a quarter, and you could buy a cranberry opalescent salt shaker, hobnail salt shaker for a quarter, or a lampshade for $1. It was nothing like it is today. At the river side of the factory was a railroad side, where they brought in the silica, the sand, and so forth on railroad cars. Well, in those days, there was no place for them to get rid of the glass if it was broken or when they cleaned the pots. So they threw it out the side door. So there was mounds of glass from there down over to the rail car. And they eventually had to concrete it over. But what I remember most about that area was that there was a footbridge from that end of the street across the gully to the street on the other side where a lot of my girlfriends lived. So that was an easy way to go and go to 4.5 Street. The Fentons provided monetary support for our basketball courts, our tennis courts, the track, the swimming pool. This was all done during my growing up years. We would not have had what we had as a small town if it hadn't been for the Fentons. Fun times always included the coin toss. We had a basketball court, and in the summertime there was a 4th of July celebration, and there were fish ponds and all the little things that kids do, and there was a tiered step-up construction that was placed there, and Fenton's donated glass, and you threw nickels, and if you threw a nickel and it landed in the item, it was yours. That was back when we were kids. You remember doing that, Sandy? Sandy is my grade school childhood friend from Williamstown, and she lives in St. Albans, so she's here to make sure I tell everything right tonight. The Fenton coin toss thing kind of went to the side, except in the grade school, where they still did it right up to closing. at the carnival that was held in the grade school every year. But they would do Fenton Bingo in the same park in recent years during the Relay for Life. You would buy tickets, and all the money went to Relay for Life, and they donated the glass, so if you covered the card or you did, a row, you got a piece of glass of your choosing. They didn't hand it to you, you got to pick something out. If there was ever a comfortable union between a business and a community, Fenton Art Glass and Williamstown were partners. Fenton provided generations of local residents with jobs, from engineers to skilled craftsmen to sales and office support. Even I stuffed envelopes in the summer 2 different years with catalogs that they mailed out. It was a boring job, and I hated the trip through the factory because the guys in those days were terrible. Cat calls were awful, and I was 15. The Fenton family has been generous. They practiced a kind form of capitalism by giving to the schools, the hospitals, their church, and the community at large. Good memories of fun and safe childhood. Thank you. Oh, wait a minute, I have one more thing. My mom didn't have anything in her house that was clutter, unlike me. We had to use everything. This is from my childhood that sat on my dresser. It's still in one piece. I kept my hair bands and ribbons in it, bobby pins and so forth, and it still holds the same thing at home. I had to empty it out and wash it to bring it tonight. But it's a little French opalescent hobnail box, and it's in pretty good shape for having been around, beat up by a kid for all those years. It's got one little damaged place right there. But that's the piece I have that I kept the longest. Okay, Woody, you're on.
I think my part of the discussion tonight is what was it like to manage a glass factory or work in a glass factory? How many here have actually worked in a glass factory? I take it that I could get involved with about anything I tell you. What was it like to work or manage a glass factory? The answer is very, very short, not much fun. I was there in the early 2000s for a couple of years. My background is in production. I've been a production supervisor or manager all my life, primarily in the wood industry. So I came into a glass factory and found a dying industry, in fact, on life support. Shrinking marketplace, declining sales, a very quickly dwindling and aging pool of skilled workers without that next generation that was interested or saw a future in glassworking. And the history of factories failing and going down over across the state of West Virginia has been documented for years and years and decades and decades. It wasn't bad management that killed it. It wasn't lack of raw materials. It wasn't even lack of people. It was just that our country, as consumers, changed their tastes and competition of machine-made wares and very cheaply made foreign wares just drove it out of business. I thought I would illustrate. Dean said we were allowed to bring one thing or maybe two if we were lucky. So here's a story about a little wine decanter. This is a table service wine decanter. There's a company called Dottie, and they own several chains of restaurants. Among them, Olive Garden, Red Lobster, and you would recognize the others as well. So they wanted, Olive Garden wanted this little table service decanter to be made, handmade. We put a flat top on it to start. That didn't really suit them. So we put a slanted top on it. On this side, it has a little olive branch. That little olive branch is the pour line. The server was to pour to that olive branch because you can't give away alcohol in a restaurant, even an ounce or half an ounce at a time. Very, very expensive proposition. So we had a stenciling machine that would automatically produce stencils in wide sheet format. And you apply a stencil to the outside of the glass, and then you sandblast that to create that effect. You're more than welcome to pass it around. That one was a reject because the stencil, the person that stenciled that one got a little bit of sandblasting out around the edges of the stencil, and it won't come off. It's actually in the glass. So we buy a mold, $1,500, $2,000 for that mold. We blow a bunch of prototypes. We figure out the stencil. We figure out what the capacity of the glass is, so that when we put that stencil on there, it actually holds that many ounces and not some more or less. The blowers have to get pretty good at how much glass is in the bottom of that thing so that you have exactly the right amount of pour. And so we made up cases and cases of them, and they decided they didn't like it. So that's why you've never seen another one of those, because there aren't any. They never really left the factory. They went to Dottie corporate, and that was it. So that's what it's like to manage a glass factory. Let me tell you another little anecdote. We had customers, some high-end customers around the country, but a few in New York City. Places where, you know, if we had to have $5 or $6 per wine glass to manufacture it, we could still get that. Pretty rare. One of our customers was a restaurant in New York City. It was called Windows on the World. Do you know where that one was?
Yeah.
On 911, we had 8 cases of glassware labeled for Windows on the World. Yeah, that's what it's like to manage a glassware. Never has a customer been lost under more tragic conditions, I think, though, in all honesty. I think I'm going to talk just a little bit about something that is apt to create some hard feelings. It is the collector and the enthusiast and the historian who romanticizes the glass industry. Let me assure you that for the glass worker, it was hot, hard, repetitive work. Yes, they became very, very skilled at it. They became skilled at it because they stayed with it. They worked in a group of guys in a shop where you had a blower, a gatherer, a blower, a foot setter, somebody gathering bits, and a crack-off boy, and they had to work together. It's very, very well orchestrated. It looks artful. It is. It takes a lot of skill, but it was just hot, hard, repetitive work. And it is us, as collectors and enthusiasts, that tend to romanticize that, because it didn't matter to the glass worker whether he was creating a mason jar or some beautiful object of art. You know, it was just hard work. It was a paycheck, and I think we don't want to think of it that way when we're collectors or when we enjoy glassware, but it's well that we don't forget it either. You know, I suppose I suppose a lot of trades are like that, but watching a guy work a piece of hot glass, we see what skill it takes, but it was just hard work to him. So with that, I'll let you go.
Pass that around. My name's Dave Bush. I live in Weston, West Virginia, and I'm the history teacher. 21st century history this is my 40th year. And the state is always throwing things at you like this CSO or that learning objective or this behavioral objective or whatever it is this year. I don't remember. But it's something, policy something. And we're supposed to cover things like labor, multinational corporations, and immigration, and social, multicultural. And we know West Virginia, they only make coal. Wait a minute, how about the apples over in the Panhandle, or the steel up north, or how about the pottery? How about the glass? Weston is a glass town or a mentally insane town. Take your choice. 150 years of mental illness and 100 years of plus of glass. That's what made Weston and Clarksburg glass. Fairmont glass, Morgantown glass, Parkersburg glass. North Central West Virginia's, they're glass people. A few strip mines, a couple deep mines, but it's not southern West Virginia coal mine country, it's glass. And I realized that I could cover all those CSOs with glass history. 2 children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of glass workers. And so I went in the classroom and I started doing that. And the Board of Education was very supportive. They even set up an enrichment program for the kids who do good things. We've taken bus trips to glass factories as a reward. And in the classroom, I started to get them involved in the Glass Museum. Community service. We want children to do community service. In a lot of schools, if you work at McDonald's, they gave you community service credit. I never understood that one. Why not a glass museum? And over the years, I've managed to get several kids involved in the Glass Museum. We've had students actually put up displays and showcases. And we've had students volunteer at organizations. We've had students do a lot of manual labor. And one of the things in the classroom is oral histories. They're assigned to go out and find a glass worker. And I love the one where, I'm not a glass worker. You live in Weston, knock on a door. I'm not a glass worker. Ask the janitor. He was a glass worker. And some of the students who really get into it, and they actually find out a family member was a glass worker. And the criteria is, you worked in a glass factory. You didn't have to be a blower, you could have been a secretary, maintenance, mowed the yard, whatever. You just worked in a glass factory. How long? Didn't matter. I get interviews where a person worked less than an hour and never went back. A person got fired in the first hour for hitting somebody. A person who worked 50 years. A gentleman named Buck Eagle, which I think they had to force him out of the factory physically because he would not retire when he was in his 80s. He kept showing up and was in the way. To give an example of a glass, and some of the glass interviews are pretty boring, like no memories, just a job, couldn't wait to get out of it. And then I get many, many page interviews. This is just one I pulled out of a file by one of my students. What year did the person work? Well, they started in 1979, West Virginia Glass Specialty, worked approximately 3 years. Gathered handles, set handles, carried over, cracked off. They made ladles, jugs, pitchers, glasses, punch bowls. Interesting story. The heat. It was unreal. Working in a factory over 100 degrees. I became very ill. They told me to go home. I got as far as Kitsonville 7-Eleven and couldn't drive any further. I stopped and went into the phone booth to call for help. Next thing I remember is being in the hospital. Curled in a ball, giving me shots of muscle relaxers to straighten out my body. I'd had a heat stroke. Also worked at Louis Glass during my last 2 years of high school on the hoot owl shift. I worked from 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning and then attended high school. They worked from Sunday to Thursday. I remember this person. They slept a lot in my class. You had to be somewhat tolerant to someone who's a taxpayer in high school. I remember him well because Lewis County High School had, in its vocational program, a glass factory. Students would come to school, report to homeroom, get on a school bus, and go to the Lewis County High School glass training program, where they worked glass for 2 hours a day, and then came back and did their other classes. That supplied labor to the glass factories. Of course, that program is now defunct because there's no glass factories. I stress to the students the importance of primary resources. Photos. Don't throw them away. When Grandpa dies, don't throw anything away. We've been fortunate enough to get many glass factory photos, glass factory catalogs, maybe the union books, other types of books. Recently, a couple years ago, a student let it be known that in the attic of their house they found a metal box that had 300 plus 3x5 index cards of little drawings of etchings. Ended up being the Colonial Glass Factory's 300 plus etchings, and no one knew about them. The museum acquired them. They're now digitized on disc. That knowledge was not lost, and it was found in a hidden compartment in an attic. Students are often coming in saying, well, I have this 8mm movie Super 8 that's got Grandpa blowing glass in 1952. Do you want a copy? Yes, please. Students have brought in Princess House parties on VHS. They have been a real asset to the Glass Museum, but they've also been a real asset to preserving history, and I encourage that effort every year. The paperweight I passed around is something else the students are encouraged to do. Hey, why not donate something to the museum? We'll give you a deed of gift. It'll have your name on it for posterity. They're like, what do you mean? What kind of glass? Glass. Well, what's the rules? Glass. I make it easy. You know, some still fail. But anyway. And I tell them up front, once you donate it, it's not yours anymore. It belongs to the museum. And we hope it ends up in an exhibit permanently because it's that good. That paperweight is that good. Student comes in, I got a paperweight my great uncle made, and I looked at it and I'm like, that wasn't made in Weston. They always put their initials on the bottom. I said, where'd you get this? My great uncle. Well, that wasn't made around here. No, he lived up in the Panhandle. His name was Ed Rithner. He's a legend in paperweights. But the paperweight, oh, we got a bunch of them at home. So that one now belongs to the museum. What do I get donated? Oh, you got the one who comes walking in, and he's drinking the A&W root beer in the actual glass bottle. When he takes the last drink, he says, I'm donating this one. Is that okay? Yes, I give him a deed of gift. It goes to the museum. It may go in the trash. I don't know what you do with it. I've had baby food jars, cannon jars, pop bottles, West Virginia glass, we've had Fenton. But they all get a deed of gift, and I don't judge them based upon the piece. But it's fun because now I have students, a couple years ago, you know the hoodlum kid? You know he's not going to make it. He hates history. He flunked it 3 times in a row to another teacher. Studying my class, and it's like, I tell him the lightning hot draw story, which is a medicine made in Weston in the 1880s. A couple weeks later, he comes in beaming. Mr. Bush, lightning hot drop bottle. I'm like, oh my God, where'd you get it? Well, I was doing community service for tobacco violation at schools, picking up trash in the community, and I seen a piece of glass in the dirt, and I dug it up, and it's a lightning hot drop bottle. Are you going to donate it? No, I'm putting it on eBay. So they also learn capitalism. I love teaching history, but I also love living history, and I want the kids. We've even had glass canes donated that Grandpa made. heritage, and I wish other schools could do something like it. And it doesn't have to be glass. It could be pottery up north, steel, or White House vinegar jugs over in the Panhandle. But that's what I do, teach history. Hope the kids love it too. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tom Felt. I grew up in Southern California, nowhere near a glass factory. I then went on to spend some 30, 35 years in the Northern Virginia suburbs of the Washington, D.C. area. So I'm here to talk about how does somebody from Southern California and Northern Virginia end up in West Virginia because of glass. Well, I'll give you a little background on me. I have been a glass collector for many years, and I very early on realized that I love doing research on the topic. And so I started writing books. And at least 4 of my books were devoted to candlesticks. And I'll just mention in passing, we happen to have my 3-volume set on glass candlesticks, which is out of print, but we do have some copies at the museum that are available for sale and signed by the author. So you would think when I was asked to bring a piece of glass to this meeting, I would bring a candlestick. And I thought about it seriously. I thought, first of all, well, Viking Glass Company did some wonderful, wonderful mid-century modern candlesticks, and I had quite a large collection of them, which I've donated to the museum, so I could have brought one of those. Or maybe one of the Payton City candlesticks. Payton City had a factory that at the time I was working on the candlestick books was just beginning to peak in popularity, but at that point really very little was known about the company, so I made a special effort to acquire as many of their candlesticks as I could include in the book. And I finally decided, though, if I really wanted to bring a candlestick that epitomized West Virginia to me, it would probably be the cherub candlestick that was made by the Central Glass Company up in Wheeling in the 1890s. Just a wonderful figural candlestick. So what did I bring? Why? Well, I mean, it's a pretty pattern. It's actually a very popular pattern that sold well when it was originally issued. It was a very inexpensive pattern. You could get a goblet in this pattern for 59 cents. It's inexpensive glass, machine made. It was intended to be sold in dime stores, possibly given away as premiums with food products that you bought. Any number of ways to make very inexpensive glass available to the general public. And it's a documented pattern called Park Lane that we know was originally brought out by Colony Glass in the 1950s. They were not a glass producer. They had glass made for them by other factories. They were also a wholesaler and importer. And we know in later years that they actually bought a number of glass factories and then had them make glass for them, most notably the Indiana Glass Company, who reissued this piece in the 1970s in the ever-popular colors of avocado, green, and amber. So why am I standing here talking about how I came to West Virginia because of glass with a piece of Indiana glass from Dunkirk, Indiana in my hands? Well, the real reason is not this piece of glass. It's what is in this box that I just set on the table, the seat next to me, which was a recent donation to the museum. What brought me to West Virginia was paper. This is one box of perhaps a dozen or 20 similar boxes full of the drawings done by a previously unknown designer, Catherine Herpel, who worked from 1939 to 1966, and during that period of time created pieces such as Park Lane sherbet that we just looked at, and the entire line that went through it. And as you go through this box, there's pattern after pattern after pattern that were the pieces that my parents, our grandparents bought because they were inexpensive, useful pieces, introduced, as I said, in 1957 as heavenly, beautiful crystal at a down-to-earth price, so amazingly moderate in cost. You can set your entire table, traditional or contemporary, with Park Lane at a fraction of what you would expect to be paid. What amazed me about this collection is they were all designed here in West Virginia. So even though Indiana eventually ended up with the molds, that piece quite possibly was made in Clarksburg, West Virginia, by this woman who was one of the movers and not only responding to the things that we as consumers liked, but creating pieces that drew us in. I mean, so much of what we consider style from that period of time that she was operating, and she was with the factory not only as Hazel Atlas Glass Company, but after it was purchased and became part of the Continental Can Company. And then after Continental Can was purchased by Brockway, she continued designing for that entire span of a quarter century, creating pieces that we see every day, but she is totally unknown. That box of papers just excited me tremendously, and it was paper that brought me here. Dean, who introduced us at the beginning and will be speaking to you later on, is actually the person who first whispered in my ear, well, whispered in an email, wouldn't it be nice if there was someone in Weston to work with our archives? We have thousands of catalogs. We now have the archives of the Flint Glass Workers Union. We just have a tremendous amount of research materials, and as I said, I love research. So I have to tell you that very first hint of wouldn't it be nice just sent a tingle of excitement through me. And I pondered it, I thought about it several weeks, and finally got up my courage and mentioned to my partner, what would you think about moving to West Virginia? And his immediate response was, hell no. So, slight setback there, but somehow we worked through that, and 5 years ago, indeed, we moved to West Virginia. And I would invite you, anyone who's working on a research project involving glass, you're probably aware that there are a lot of other facilities in this country that have major resources for you. The Recal Library in Corning obviously is one of the huge ones, but many other resources. But that museum in Weston is also a place that if you're doing serious research in glass, you have to come to Weston, because we have records that you're not going to find anywhere else. Now, as archivist, have I done anything to make them accessible to you? Well, that's another story. Maybe next year we'll have made some progress in that area, and I can come back and fill you in on that. But that's how I came to West Virginia. I love glass. I'm a glass geek, but I love the paper that goes along with it even more.
Well, I'm Dottie Daugherty, and I'm from Huntington, West Virginia. And I am a collector. And my topic is, why do I collect? First, my mother collected. Second, I like lovely things. Third, I am acquisitive. And how many of you collect for one or more of these same reasons? Do we have any collectors here? All right, you maybe collect for one of these reasons. I started collecting when I went with my mother to antique shops when she began collecting American brilliant period cut glass in the 1960s. I bought a piece of American brilliant cut glass here and there and went with Mom to the first meeting of the American Cut Glass Association in Toledo, Ohio in 1979. And then my collecting really took off. Though I had begun teaching and had my own money to spend on my hobby, I was saved from extreme extravagance by not having much time to go shopping, and really wasn't focused on any particular pieces. I just liked glass. And then I went with the Glass Club of Huntington to Williamstown, West Virginia. We went to the Benton factory, and we went to an antique mall. To me, and I acquired my first celery vase. Isn't that gorgeous? I think I can hold it there while I talk. It was a lovely piece of glass, but as I showed it off, I was told that it had been made in the Wheeling, Pittsburgh area around 1840. Isn't it fun to learn about your acquisitions? Here was a piece of glass made before gas was discovered, and the heat of furnaces could be controlled. It had been cut before electricity had been discovered to run the cutting wheels. And a man had held this glass to the cutting wheel. A machine to press the pattern into glass had not been invented yet. I really fell in love with the early period of American cut glass. The patterns cut into the glass were similar. We have the vesicas, the glazes, the wheat pattern, all of that, and the panels. All of this is similar, whether the glass had been cut in the Wheeling, Pittsburgh area by the Ritchie and Wheat Company in Wheeling, Bakewell in Pittsburgh, or in New England by the Boston and Sandwich Glass Company. The patterns all had an Anglo-Irish look, and why not? Most of the cutters had come from England and Ireland. So I collected early period cut glass celeries. After about half dozen, my friend Betty Daniel, with whom I traveled to seminars and antique shops, said, "Dottie, your collection is getting boring. Why don't you add some color?" And I discovered peach blow. Yes. Hobbs Berkunier made this peach blow. New England Glass Company made peach blow, which they called Wild Rose. And Mount Washington Glass Company made peach blow, which is not the red brick shading to yellow, or the kind of rosy pink to white that is the New England. This, of course, is the Hobbs Berkunier peach blow. But the Mount Washington peach blow shades from a kind of a rosy pink to a blue-gray, very soft blue-gray. I was on a quest. I finally found the Mount Washington peach blow celery about 4 years ago. I think I had looked for about 20, 25 years. It is not in the book on celeries that I wrote, or at the Museum of American Glass in Weston, West Virginia, where most of my collection is, but in a cabinet at the apartment in Huntington. Sometimes I just look at it and just admire it. I very seldom handle it because the Mount Washington peach blow seems to be unusually fragile. Do you have any acquisitions that you're particularly fond of? Yeah. One more. I'm kind of disobeying Dean's rule that we only do, this is the last one. But I now live in an apartment. It's a rather small apartment. So I'm collecting paperweights. And this is a paperweight that blank was made at Pilgrim Glass Company in Cerrito, West Virginia. And it was cut by Kelsey Murphy. And I just think it's lovely. And I hope you all enjoy your collecting as much as I have. Thank you.
Seems appropriate that after beautiful pieces of fine cut glass and Victorian art glass, I go last with the pop bottle. My name is Dean Six. My home is Cairo, West Virginia, up in Ritchie County. In 1965, my parents had built a new home in, doesn't rural West Virginia seem a little redundant? In West Virginia, not that far from North Bend State Park. In the summer, life was pretty quiet. The nearest family with children lived about 1 mile away. We were not allowed to walk along the highway that far. So it was me, my brother, and my sister. Being the eldest, I got tired of beating up on them pretty early in the summer. I got tired of my mother giving me a hard time for beating up on my younger siblings. So we started doing things together. We would walk the hill in which we lived, which of course was a very twisty, turning road. Cars lost their hubcaps. We carried those home for a while until my father said that's enough. We hung them on trees, thought they were really snazzy. The other thing we carried home were pop bottles. A pop bottle in 1965 was worth 3 cents. My allowance was $0.25 a week. However, my parents saw fit that even though they gave you the quarter, they dictated what you should do with it. You saved it, and then you bought something they approved of. My first purchase was a baseball glove, my second was a bicycle. Those two things took all the quarters of my childhood. That left no money left for mad money for a kid. But the pop bottles, we came to Parkersburg, West Virginia to Wilson's Market once a month for my mother to do her big shopping. Small shopping was done at the local store. But the list and the special things were bought at Wilson's. My brother, sister, and I always had pop bottles to take in for 3 cents. A comic book was 5 cents, a candy bar was 10, 30 pop bottles, 90 cents. We were wild. Until one day, they wouldn't buy this pop bottle I picked up in the summer of 1965. Big deal. Took it back home. In the 60s, bottle collecting was becoming a rather vogue thing. One of my father's friends heard about my bottle, asked to see it, looked at it. It says Coca-Cola in script. Bottling Works, Parkersburg, WVA. Although it doesn't look like the Coke bottle we recognize today. He offered me $15 for this pop bottle in 1965. As an entrepreneurial kid, my little eyes came wide open and I realized that all pop bottles were not created equal. In this world, there are 3-cent pop bottles and there are $15 pop bottles. My mission, living in rural West Virginia, was clear. I was going to find every $15 pop bottle there was and take them home. Obviously, I didn't sell it. I still have it. I might add that today, this bottle in this condition is worth about $12. Just like stocks and other investments, sometimes you do it right, and sometimes you don't. I still love the bottle. Over the next few years, my father, brother, grandfather, and uncle became infatuated with bottles. We were your typical little West Virginia family, and after church on Sunday, we were allowed to do family things, which meant getting in a truck, the 5 guys I just named, 3 generations of us, and we went bottle hunting. That basically meant my grandfather would remember where a home used to be. Most of the property had been purchased by West Vaco, West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company, and abandoned. People literally had walked away and left the homes untouched. We would go, my grandfather would just kind of stand in the middle and guess where they'd tossed their trash. Trash is not what it is today and then. Back then, trash was very little. You recycled everything. So you didn't have much to throw out, but they had a few things. They got tossed usually in a ravine out beyond the outhouse. Grandpa had his whole entire formula on where they probably put their trash. And he was often right. We had a little hose. Often my dad's, grandpa's, and uncles all looked the same as the thing they used to dig ginseng with. My brother and I had a little hose they made just for us. We would scratch around in the dirt, and on a great Sunday we'd come back with 3 or 4 or 5 bottles. Indeed, there are bottle people who dig privies. We never did that. My mother thought that was the outside limit, that we were not bringing those into her house. By the second summer, we'd built shelves in one entire wall of the garage. We had about 200 bottles. By the third summer, we were boxing them up and stashing them back at my father's farm, any place we could find, because we were carrying home every bottle we found. We quickly learned to, like the pop bottle story, they weren't all the same. We began to discriminate and keep only certain bottles. Later that same summer in '65, I bought my first piece of glass at an auction for $3. It was a piece of fin. $3 came from buying and selling my pop bottles, the 3 cent ones. So it took a lot of to pay for that piece of glass. I still have it as well. In my community, glass was everywhere. Pop bottles we picked up on the hill. Glass was in our colonial television set. Who ever heard of a colonial television set? We had one. The windows in our home, my eyeglasses, which are today plastic, the canning jars in my mother's basement, the canning jars in my grandmother's basement, the glass washboard I remember in my grandmother's basement, the sediment bowl on my dad's tractor, glass was everywhere. It just isn't so today. Glass has been a big part of my story growing up, and starting probably with this pop-up. It became an important theme in my life, became the subject of a bunch of my academic study, and to this day I love it, and that explains why I'm hanging out with these 5 other folks talking about glass. And it all started with a pop bottle that they wouldn't give me 3 cents for. I think that pretty much concludes what we had to say. I would say that when I first envisioned this little idea of 6 of us times 6 different stories, I had no hope or aspiration that it would turn out as well as I think it has. I'm very pleased with my fellows and the stories they told. I think we've given you a great perspective of how we have all come to love and volunteer and work at the Glass Museum in Weston. You see we come from entirely different approaches, different reasons for being there, but it's probably pretty obvious we all love it, and we do. We have a table with some freebies and some things you might want to buy from us. We also have something to give you for attending with us tonight, because this is the 200th anniversary of West Virginia Glass. We would love to give you a Habsburg Junior celery vase. But I don't think that would go over well. However, we have one of the remaining glass factories in West Virginia is Marble King in Payton City, West Virginia. We have a cat's eye marble from them, which has been printed with West Virginia glass, 1813, 2013, has a little logo of a glass blower on it. So for you sharing tonight and this occasion with us, we'd like for each of you to take home one. There's one more small story to that. We ask you to put it in your left pocket. As long as you keep it in your left pocket, we guarantee this marble to bring you good luck. If by chance it fails, and not all things are perfect, it might fail, bring it to Weston, to the Glass Museum, please. And the lady at the front desk will probably be Sharon, our only paid staff person. Explain to her that you were given a marble that didn't have the proper luck, and you would like either your money back or to trade it for a more lucky marble. She has a bucket of them under her desk. And if that doesn't get you to Weston, nothing will. We thank you for sharing with us the 200th anniversary, your patience. We'll be up here to answer questions if that's acceptable. We have a little bit of time, I think, and I'm really pleased with the way the evening's going. We thank you for sharing with us, celebrating 200 years of West Virginia Glass.
I've got one just like
Thank you for attending the lecture tonight, and we ask that you remember some of our upcoming lectures, and please feel free to look through everything we have and frequently use them. If anybody has any questions, please feel free.
Somebody elaborate a little bit more on the state of the market for glass and what happened to the glass factories and how many are left?
How many are left? In West Virginia?
Well, I mean, in West Virginia and anywhere else as well. I mean, I imagine that if they're closing West Virginia, they have closed, and they must have closed elsewhere. There can't be too many left because.
That's true. I think a lot of the glass industry had been centered along the Ohio River Valley.
Again,
Along the Ohio River Valley, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia. The big ones are all.
Is that because the resources were here?
Yes.
They were located there because of the resources, probably primarily because of cheap.
Not necessarily the sand or
Not necessarily.
And transportation of goods up and down the river.
the railroad. Where was the factory you were talking about? What was it called?
Masterpiece Crystal and Jane Lew.
The 5 West Virginia factories that we consider the 5 big factories, Davis Lynch in Morgantown, which does lampshades. Blanco is still holding on. That's 2. Wismach, which a lot of people don't know about. Wismach's in Hayden City. They do flat glass, like stained glass, flat glass. Masterpiece Crystal, which is the last hand-blown wine glass. You've got 5 people working in a team, and it could go under any time. And Marble King, which makes marbles.
I mean, is it a loss of demand because the idea of the consumer's tastes have changed?
That's some of it, but the other thing is that, you know, at Masterpiece, you know, a single wine stem, you know, they can produce that for $4 or $5, and you can go to Costco and buy a set of 6 for $2. You know, they may be machine made, they're certainly foreign, but you just can't beat it.
Now, think about I stress this in my classroom. It's like, you know what the kids drink out of? They take that Pizza Hut plastic cup home, and the cover's full of Pizza Hut plastic cups. That's what they drink. They don't drink out of glass at home. I drink out of glass. We live in a generation where they don't even want to do dishes. They want to eat off paper plates and throw it away. They don't. The commercial end of it, where you had ketchup bottles, now plastic. Yeah, the glass pickle jar.
When was the last time that you heard of a bride-to-be going to the jewelry store to pick out her pattern of china, silver, and glassware? When was the last time you heard it?
I did it in 1982. 1992, sorry about that.
Let me interrupt that one for a moment. I work at a company called Replacements in North Carolina, a very big company. And the bridal registry, for all practical purposes, is dead. Bridal registries today, as they exist, are at Lowe's. I mean, think about that.
Walmart,
Walmart.
Kohl's, Target.
The fine jewelry store push, crystal china, is an anomaly, and by far it's a very insignificant minority. Those people still exist, but they're just not very many. Not enough to sustain an industry.
My daughter, I collected crystal thumbprint for years, and she didn't know it. And when it was time for her to get married, I said, this can be your everyday glassware. That never put the crystal in line. They did it in green and blue and pink and other colors, but they didn't do it in crystal in the line. So I managed to put it all together and had quite a store. And I said, now listen to me, honey, you can't put this in the dishwasher. And she says, why? I said, because the glass won't tolerate the high temperatures of our modern dishwashers. She said, I don't want it. So I use it every day.
What is it? I'm just thinking about Swarovski crystals. They are so popular. I mean, yeah. I'm telling you a story. My mother was she was Austrian growing up during World War II, and she was forced to work in the Swarovski crystal factory. And she told me because she would get in trouble. And the men who were working there, they wanted her to do stuff, to make prisms and stuff, and she didn't know what to do. She was 19 years old or something. And so these men would always say, here, you do the business, you do the pieces that we do, we'll do the heavy stuff. So, but that's very popular.
I don't know if you know the products she's speaking of. They're small, faceted things that have a very high refractive color index. It's a bit of a devious product in that it's sprayed with an enamel on the outside and fired to give it a false surface. That prismatic look has nothing to do with the glass whatsoever. It's the equivalent of carnival glass in America. Then compile them to make a small object that sells at a really high price because they've created, what's the word we use anymore? A brand. They've created a brand that we all perceive as being good and valuable. It's a neat little product, but it originally started off as a company that made artificial gemstones for low-end jewelry that imitated fine stones. Somehow they parlayed that into a world market of,
Prisons for the Nazis.
they made all kinds of things over the time, but yeah, that's what they do and that's how they do it, and it's largely because they've taught us through the marketplace that that's a good product. I'm not saying it's not, but it's not the way we perceive it to be. Sir?
Mr. Six, you may be curious, how does that pop bottle, mine is not worth 3 cents and 65, it might be worth 15. Is there a reason for that?
This is I guess I should put it very briefly because, yes. Start tossing. This is a Coca-Cola bottle from about 1910. The standard Coca-Cola bottle shape we know, known as a Hobskirt or Mae West Coke bottle. The small and 6.5, 7 ounce is patented first in 1915 and again in 1923. It does not exist before 15. This is a Coke bottle prior to that date. It's not made in West Virginia. It was made for a West Virginia firm. On the back of it, on the heel, it'll say DOC, which stands for D.O. Cunningham, a bottle maker in Pittsburgh. It's hand-blown and finished at the top. So it's about 1910. Its value at the time would have been because it said Parkersburg on it. That's still its main value. And crosses over to being a collectible Coca-Cola item. The Coca-Cola collectors are a crazy bunch.
I could tell you about, cash used pop bottles at 3 cents. There was a country store and there was a pipeline company going through our rural area, and my brother and I would sneak over right after lunch and steal all their empty pop bottles. This again is about 1964. And I think the workers knew we were doing it, but we accumulated $9 worth of pop bottles at 3 cents a piece. And when we went to the store to cash them in, the store guy's like, well, I don't sell knee-high. I won't take knee-high. I sell whistle, I'll take the whistle. So he starts sorting them out. Now, imagine how many pop bottles at $9 worth at 3 cents a bottle. After he starts sorting them, he finally gets frustrated and says, okay, I'll just buy them all, even though he is stuck with the ones that he did not sell. And that's the first time I went to a drive-in movie theater and we took our parents as a treat from pop bottles.
What is celery glass? And I know that,
Oh, I'm so glad. In the late 1700s, celery became an edible vegetable. Before that, it had kind of been just a pharmaceutical. And celery is very labor intensive. You have to mound it to get the white stalks. And so they decided it needed its own vase to show it off on the dinner table. And that's what a celery vase is. They're called an upright celery, celery vase, celery glass. And there is a book written on celery. It's been on sale at the West Virginia
they would
Museum.
take the entire vegetable and put it in.
Yeah. Of course, they cleaned it. No, I think they cleaned it first. The picture that I have is from an 1860 book, an English cookbook.
Did anybody eat it or they just looked at it?
Yeah, no, it could eat. And in fact, they have the trays later on, and you could take it out and dip it in salt, and then just eat it like that.
The book is here.
Whatever brought spoon jars to the fore. I mean, everybody had a spoon jar.
His question is about spooners and the spoon jar, spoon holder. It's a common Victorian table piece because at that time, the idea of a place setting doesn't come about. You have silver, and that's largely an 1870s innovation. Prior to that, your cutlery, the knives, had bone handles, perhaps wooden. They were kept one place. Forks were largely unknown or had 2 tines. If it was something you could eat with a fork, you probably eat with your fingers. You would pick it up with your fingers. Spoons were for liquid, knives were for cutting, and spoons not so popular. Forks not so popular. Spoons were kept on the table, knives were locked away. How do you keep them on the table? In a special vessel to hold them. People often confuse them with celery. They're about 2/3 the height of a celery. And Dottie in her book gives us some exact measurements on how you tell the difference. But to go on the table to hold the spoons, because the knives are locked away, you don't have a fork yet.
A little bit bigger than a goblet, a little less tall than an iced tea.
Which didn't exist at the time either, and iced tea doesn't exist back then in that period. True. I would suggest, because of time, any other general questions, sir?
I was just going to ask one, fellow talked about management.
Yeah.
What about child labor? I know, you know, a lot of the older pictures show, like when you talk about team, that they had a lot of young people within the glass factory working.
Absolutely, very, very, very common. And on Dean Six's book, West Virginia Glass Towns, one of the great pictures on this book is a young boy employed in warming a piece of glass. Yeah, very common. Very, very common.
Now they all work at McDonald's.
There wasn't a child labor law until, what, 1917, 1919, somewhere along here.
The big thing that changes that is the introduction of mechanization, because the children do the really simple things like open close molds. And once Michael Owens of West Virginia introduces mechanization into the process, you no longer need the children. And that he was credited with freeing them from the toils, labor, and the hot glass factory. I would suggest that, was there another general question? Yes, ma'am.
Not a question, but I just wanted to let folks know that you have written an article for Wonderful West Virginia, and it will be in the November issue on some of the last remaining factories, glass factories in West Virginia.
Thank you. And Wonderful West Virginia has been very kind to working with us this year. A number of articles to celebrate that 200 years of West Virginia glass. We'll all be up here. Our objects will be here for a few minutes. We'd love to talk to you individually. Paul's in charge of our handouts and sales table. You didn't hear us plugging books, but we might just happen to mention that we have books written by several of us. And the proceeds all go back to the museum, not to us. Thank you very much, one and all.
We do have a flyer here that does state the five remaining glass factories in West Virginia. There'll be one piece of each from each factory. We're selling to the museum. The flyer we have is one piece of each. I'm
going to transcribe.